Commander Nikolai Volkov pressed his weathered hand against the ancient control panel, watching as centuries of dust scattered beneath his touch. Through the cracked dome of the forgotten facility, Kepler 624b's dying red sun cast long shadows across the corroded metal floor. Behind him, Galath's bioluminescent markings pulsed with an anxious blue light. The human colonists who vanished from this world, the Meridian diplomats' translators clicked. They never knew this place existed, did they? Nikolai shook his head, his gray eyes reflecting the dim emergency lights that had somehow survived 300 years of abandonment. No. They built their settlements 50 kilometers south of here. They were too busy trying to survive the climate collapse to go exploring in the mountains. He ran his fingers along a series of symbols etched into the console. But whoever built this, they were trying to prevent exactly what happened to the colony. The facility had been hidden well, buried deep within the mountain range locals had named the Sword of God. If it hadn't been for the unusual energy signatures Galath's survey team detected, they might never have found it. Now, standing in what appeared to be its central control room, Nikolai felt the weight of discovery pressing down on him like the kilometers of rock overhead. These markings, Galath moved closer, her four-fingered hand hovering over the console, they match nothing in either of our species' databases. A third civilization was here, long before humans attempted colonization. Nikolai nodded, studying the holographic displays that had flickered to life at their presence. The language was alien, but the visualizations were clear enough, weather patterns, atmospheric composition, temperature gradients. This wasn't just an observation post. This was a climate control facility. They were trying to terraform the planet. And they failed. Galath's markings shifted to a deeper purple. Just as your colonists failed. Just as my people would have failed if we had attempted settlement before forming the alliance with humanity. The commander's jaw tightened. 8,000 colonists had died when Kepler 624b's climate spiraled out of control. The survivors had been evacuated, leaving behind ghost towns and graves. Now, 20 years later, the planet was even more inhospitable. Savage storms ravaged the equatorial regions, while the poles were locked in perpetual drought. A sudden tremor shook the facility, causing loose debris to cascade from the ceiling. Nikolai steadied himself against the console, while Galath's secondary arms extended for balance. The storms are getting worse, she chittered. The planet's weather patterns have become chaotic. If we cannot stabilize them soon, even this facility will be torn apart. Nikolai's fingers moved across the console with renewed purpose. There has to be something here. They wouldn't have built all this just to watch the planet die. His hand brushed against what looked like a crystalline interface, and suddenly the room was filled with light. A holographic representation of the planet materialized above them, showing a network of similar facilities spread across the surface. Most were marked in red, indicating failure or destruction, but 5 pulsed with a weak green light. They built a planetary network, Nikolai breathed. Each facility was designed to regulate a different aspect of the climate. And some of them are still operational. Galath's markings blazed with excitement. If we could reactivate the network, we might be able to stabilize the planet's climate, Nikolai finished. Give it a chance to heal itself. But as they studied the display, another alarm began to sound. New data scrolled across the screens, power readings, structural integrity warnings, and something else. Something that made Nikolai's blood run cold. The facility's main reactor, he said, his voice tight. It's not just powered down. It's building to a cascade failure. If we don't stabilize it soon, this entire mountain range will be vaporized. Galath's translator struggled to keep up with her rapid clicks. How long? Nikolai's fingers flew across the console, converting the alien time measurements. 48 hours, maybe less. And from these readings, this isn't the only facility in danger of collapse. They looked at each other, human and Meridian, both understanding the magnitude of what they'd discovered. This wasn't just about saving a failed colony world anymore. If the reactors in these facilities detonated, they would render the entire planet uninhabitable for millennia. We need to contact both our governments, Th said. Request immediate assistance. Nikolai was already reaching for his comm unit, but he paused, looking at the holographic display again. The storms in the upper atmosphere are getting stronger. Soon they'll make orbital insertion impossible. Anyone we call, they might not make it in time. Another tremor shook the facility, stronger this time. Through the dome, they could see dark clouds gathering, illuminated by flashes of lightning that seemed to dance between them with unnatural purpose. Then we do what we can, Th markings pulsed with determination. Your people have a saying, don't they? Better to light a single candle than curse the darkness. Nikolai allowed himself a grim smile. Something like that. He turned back to the console, his mind already racing through possibilities. Let's see if we can get auxiliary power online. If we can stabilize this facility's reactor, maybe we can buy enough time for help to arrive. As they worked, neither of them noticed that the lightning outside had begun to form patterns, or that the ancient symbols on the console had started to glow with an inner light of their own. The storm was awakening, and with it, secrets that had lain dormant for centuries were about to reveal themselves. The ancient facility's archives came to life with a reluctant hum, holographic data streams filling the air around Nikolai and Th. The commander's eyes narrowed as he tried to make sense of the alien text flowing past them, while his Meridian companion's bioluminescent patterns shifted rapidly through shades of green and blue. These records, Th whispered, her translator barely keeping up with her excitement, they're not just technical specifications. They're a historical archive. The civilization that built this place, they called themselves the Vanguard. Another violent tremor shook the facility, and somewhere in the distance, metal screamed against metal. They had managed to stabilize the reactor's primary systems, but the secondary containment was still deteriorating. Outside, the storm had grown into a towering cyclone that seemed to defy the laws of nature itself. What happened to them? Nikolai asked, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. How did a civilization capable of building something like this just disappear? Th appendages danced across the holographic interface, sorting through centuries of compressed data. According to these records, they were not native to this world. They came here as refugees, fleeing something they called the collapse. They tried to transform Kepler 624b into a sanctuary, but her voice trailed off as new images filled the chamber. They showed a thriving civilization, massive cities under crystalline domes, vehicles that seemed to ride the lightning itself, and machines that could reshape the weather with a thought. But then came other images, massive storms that dwarfed anything they'd seen yet, geological upheavals that swallowed entire continents, and finally, a desperate plan. They couldn't control it, Nikolai realized, watching the historical record unfold. The more they tried to force the planet to change, the more violently it responded. Not exactly, Th corrected, her markings pulsing with revelation. The planet wasn't fighting them. It was trying to communicate. The next series of records confirmed her theory. The Vanguard had discovered that Kepler 624b wasn't just a planet, it was semi-sentient. The weather patterns weren't random, they were synaptic firing on a planetary scale. The storms were thoughts. The lightning was speech. That's why the human colony failed, Nikolai said, pieces clicking into place. And why your people's surveys showed the planet was unsuitable for terraforming. We weren't just fighting the environment, we were fighting a conscious entity that didn't understand what we were trying to do. A new alarm blared through the facility, interrupting their discovery. The reactor's secondary containment was failing faster than their initial calculations had predicted. They had less than 24 hours now, not 48. The Vanguard found a solution, Th continued, her appendages moving with increased urgency. They created a network of facilities that could serve as a translation matrix, a way to communicate with the planetary consciousness. But something went wrong during the final initialization sequence. The historical record ended abruptly there, leaving them with more questions than answers. But they had no time to dig deeper. The facility shuddered again, and this time the sound of breaking glass echoed from somewhere above. "Commander," Jera-TH's translator struggled to convey the complexity of her clicking speech, "these readings suggest that the storm outside isn't just a weather pattern. It's the planet trying to interface with the facility's systems. With us." Nikolai stared at the swirling maelstrom visible through the cracked dome. The lightning had indeed formed patterns, complex geometries that reminded him of neural networks. "Can we complete what the Vanguard started? Initialize the translation matrix?" "The power requirements would be enormous," Jera-TH replied, her markings shifting to a troubled orange. "We would need to redirect energy from the reactor's containment systems. If we failed, the reactor would detonate immediately," Nikolai finished. "But if we do nothing, it explodes anyway." He turned to face his alien companion, his expression grim but determined. "What do you think? Should we try to talk to a planet?" Before Jera-TH could respond, the facility's systems suddenly surged with power. The holographic displays flickered and transformed, showing new information that neither of them had accessed. The planet was no longer trying to interface with just the facility. It was trying to interface with them. Symbols and images flashed through the air faster than either of them could process. The temperature in the chamber began to fluctuate wildly. The metal floor beneath their feet vibrated with subsonic frequencies that made Nikolai's teeth ache and caused Jera-TH's bioluminescence to strobe erratically. "It knows we're here," Jera-TH said, her voice filled with wonder and terror in equal measure. "It's been waiting for someone to find this place. To understand." Through the dome, they watched as the storm's eye centered itself directly above the facility. The lightning had stopped its random arcing and now formed a distinct pattern, a spiral of energy that reminded Nikolai of ancient Celtic knots, endless loops folding in on themselves. "The Vanguard didn't fail because their technology didn't work," he said slowly, watching the pattern repeat itself. "They failed because they died before they could complete the conversation. Before they could teach the planet how to communicate with other forms of consciousness." Another surge of power ran through the facility's systems. More alarms began to sound, warning of critical failures throughout the structure. They were out of time. They had to make a choice: try to maintain the reactor's containment and hope help arrived in time, or risk everything on an attempt to finish what the Vanguard had started. Nikolai looked at Jera-TH, seeing his own mix of fear and determination reflected in her alien features. Above them, through the ancient dome, the storm waited with unnatural patience for their decision. The facility's emergency lighting bathed everything in a blood-red glow as Nikolai and Jera-TH raced against time to reconfigure the power distribution systems. They had made their choice: they would attempt to communicate with the planetary consciousness. But they weren't alone anymore. "Incoming transmission," Jera-TH announced, her markings pulsing with concern. "Multiple vessels have entered orbit. Both human and meridian signatures." Nikolai's hands paused over the crystalline interface. "That's impossible. The storms in the upper atmosphere should make orbital insertion suicidal." The answer came in the form of a familiar voice crackling through their comm systems. "Commander Volkov, this is Admiral Hassan of the Earth Alliance vessel Hyperion. You've stirred up quite a hornet's nest down there." Before Nikolai could respond, another voice cut in, the distinctive harmonic tones of a Meridian High Commander. "Diplomat Jera-TH, your presence is required aboard the Star Weaver immediately. The Council has declared this situation a Class 1 emergency." Nikolai and Jera-TH exchanged glances. The storm above them had begun to pulse in rhythm with the facility's power fluctuations, as if sensing the new arrivals. "With respect, Admiral, High Commander," Nikolai replied, "we're in the middle of a rather delicate operation. The facility's reactor is critical, and we've discovered dash." "We know exactly what you've discovered, Commander," Hassan interrupted. Our long-range sensors detected the energy signature of the facility's activation. Do you have any idea what you're dealing with? A planetary consciousness, J.H. clicked rapidly. The storms, the climate changes, they're all part of a semi-sentient system that could be weaponized. The High Commander's harmonics carried an edge of urgency. The ability to control a planet's weather patterns. To communicate with and potentially influence a planetary-scale intelligence. The implications are staggering. The facility shuddered as another power surge raced through its systems. On the holographic displays, the reactor's containment readings continued their steady decline toward catastrophic failure. We're sending down emergency response teams, Admiral Hassan announced. The facility's systems will be contained and studied under Joint Earth Alliance Meridian supervision. There's no time, Nikolai protested. The reactor will detonate in less than 12 hours. And the planet, it's trying to communicate. If we shut down now. That's an order, Commander, Hassan's voice hardened. Stand down and prepare for evacuation. The comm system crackled with static as the storm's intensity increased. Through the dome, they could see the lightning patterns shifting, becoming more erratic, more aggressive. The planet had understood enough of their exchange to recognize a threat. J.H. Nikolai turned to his alien companion, his voice low and urgent. Your people have been studying planetary consciousness theories for centuries. What happens if we abort the communication attempt now? The Meridian's markings shifted to a deep crimson. Based on these readings, the planetary consciousness has already begun integrating with the facility's systems. A sudden disconnection could trigger a cascade effect far worse than a reactor detonation. It could drive the entity into a permanent state of hostile reaction. As if to emphasize her point, the storm above them suddenly expanded, its eye widening to encompass the entire mountain range. The lightning patterns transformed into complex fractal geometries that made Nikolai's eyes water just looking at them. Admiral, High Commander, J.H.'s translator struggled to keep up with her rapid clicks. We must continue. The consciousness is already aware of our presence, our technology, our intentions. If we attempt to contain it now, we risk triggering a planetary-scale defensive response. The potential benefits outweigh the risks, the High Commander replied. Think of what we could learn, what we could achieve with this technology. Nikolai watched as new data scrolled across the holographic displays. The planet was accessing more of the facility's historical archives, learning, understanding. And what it was learning about their civilization's histories of colonization and resource exploitation was clearly causing concern. The facility's systems suddenly locked down, sealed by commands coming from the planetary consciousness itself. Outside, the storm's intensity doubled, then tripled. Lightning began striking the incoming shuttles, forcing them to retreat to a safe distance. It's made its choice, Nikolai said grimly. And so have we. Admiral, High Commander, I respectfully suggest you withdraw to a safe orbit. What happens next? Well, we're about to finish a conversation that's been waiting 300 years to conclude. Commander Volkov, if you do not stand down immediately. The comm system went dead as a massive electromagnetic pulse erupted from the storm. Through the facility's sensors, they watched as both human and Meridian ships were forced to pull back, their systems disrupted by the planet's defensive display. The reactor containment is failing faster now, J.H. reported, her markings pulsing with nervous energy. We have maybe 6 hours left. And the consciousness, it's waiting for us to prove our intentions. Nikolai stepped back to the main console, his expression set with determination. Then let's not keep it waiting. Show us, he addressed the swirling storm above them, show us what the Vanguard couldn't finish. Show us how to make this right. The holographic displays exploded with new information as the planetary consciousness responded to his words. The storm's eye narrowed, focusing its energy directly on the facility. The time for preparation was over. The real test was about to begin. The chamber's temperature plummeted as streams of data poured through the facility's systems. Frost formed on the metal walls while lightning danced across the crystalline interfaces. Nikolai's breath came out in visible puffs as he and Jarrett worked to interpret the torrent of information the planetary consciousness was sharing with them. These patterns, Jarrett's markings flickered rapidly as her appendages traced the flowing symbols, they're not just data. They're emotional states. The planet isn't just thinking, it's feeling. A massive surge of energy coursed through the facility, causing the holographic displays to shift into three-dimensional representations of planetary weather systems. But these weren't just any weather patterns, they were memories. Look, Nikolai pointed as the images coalesced. That's the planet before the vanguard arrived. Before anyone arrived. They watched as eons of history played out before them. The planet had been self-regulating, its consciousness expressed through intricate patterns of weather and geological activity. The arrival of the vanguard had been like a sudden shock to its system, foreign thoughts interrupting its natural rhythms. The reactor containment is at 15%, Jarrett reported, her markings pulsing with urgency. We have less than 3 hours before critical failure. Above them, the storm's eye had begun to rotate in perfect synchronization with the facility's power fluctuations. Bolts of lightning struck the dome with increasing frequency, but instead of destroying it, they seemed to be following specific paths, tracing ancient circuits built into the structure itself. The vanguard, Nikolai said suddenly, understanding dawning in his eyes, they didn't fail because they couldn't communicate. They failed because they tried to force their own patterns onto the planet's consciousness. But look at what the planet is showing us now. The holographic displays shifted again, showing new weather patterns, hybrid systems that combined the planet's natural rhythms with controlled environmental modifications. The consciousness wasn't rejecting change, it was offering collaboration. Commander, Jarrett's translator clicked rapidly, the orbital vessels are returning. They're launching atmospheric penetration pods. Through the facility's external sensors, they could see the ships from both fleets attempting to pierce the storm barrier. Each pod that entered the atmosphere was immediately caught in the consciousness's defensive patterns, but instead of being destroyed, they were held in stasis, suspended in the swirling clouds. It's not attacking them, Nikolai realized. It's studying them. Learning about our current level of technology, comparing it to what it learned from the vanguard. The reactor's warning sirens reached a new pitch as containment dropped to 10%. The consciousness responded by feeding more power into the facility's systems, but it wasn't enough to halt the deterioration. We need to make a decision, Jarrett said, her markings shifting to deep blues of concern. The consciousness is offering a solution, but the power requirements, one of us would need to physically interface with the crystalline matrix to establish the final connection. Nikolai studied the schematics the planet was showing them. The interface would require a biological component, a living mind to serve as a bridge between the digital systems and the planetary consciousness. The vanguard had designed the system to be used by their own people, but their physiology hadn't been too different from humans. The person who interfaces, he said slowly, they would be exposed to the full force of the planet's consciousness. The human brain isn't designed to process that kind of information. Neither is a meridian neural network, Jarrett clicked softly. The chance of survival is less than 20%. Another tremor shook the facility as the reactor's containment dropped to 8%. Outside, the storm had grown to encompass the entire continent, its patterns becoming increasingly complex as the consciousness processed more and more information about the civilizations that sought to understand it. The pods have penetrated the upper atmosphere, Jarrett reported. Earth Alliance and Meridian forces will breach the facility in less than 30 minutes. Nikolai moved to the central interface platform, his hand hovering over the crystalline controls. Then we don't have much time. The consciousness knows what happened to its last partners. It watched the vanguard die. It watched the human colony fail. It's been alone for centuries, trying to understand why every attempt at communication ends in destruction. Commander, Jarrett's markings pulsed with alarm, you can't seriously be considering dash. Someone has to show it that we're different, Nikolai interrupted. That we've learned from the past. That we're ready to listen instead of control. He began inputting the interface sequence. Besides, you're the only one who can explain what happens here to both our governments. They'll need your expertise to understand the consciousness once the connection is established. The facility's systems hummed with power as the interface platform activated. Above them, the storm's eye narrowed to a focused beam of energy that connected directly with the dome's apex. Nikolai, Jarrett Th abandoned formal titles, her translator struggling to convey the emotion in her clicks. There has to be another way. He smiled grimly as the interface crystals began to glow. There is. That's exactly what we're about to prove. The reactor warning shifted to critical status, 5% containment and falling. The consciousness responded by feeding more power into the facility systems, creating a feedback loop that made the very air crackle with energy. Nikolai stepped onto the interface platform, feeling the crystalline matrix begin to synchronize with his nervous system. The last thing he saw before the connection initiated was Jarrett Th's bioluminescence pulsing in a pattern he'd never seen before, one that somehow conveyed both hope and farewell. Then the lightning reached down through the dome, and Commander Nikolai Volkov began to dance with the consciousness of an entire world. The moment Nikolai's consciousness merged with the planetary matrix, the storm changed. The chaotic swirls of energy resolved into precise geometric patterns, spreading across the hemisphere in waves of purposeful lightning. Within the facility, Jarrett Th watched in awe as her friend's body became suffused with the same crystalline luminescence that pulsed through the ancient machinery. The reactor containment is stabilizing, she reported to no one in particular, her markings shifting through colors of wonder and concern. Power levels are redistributing themselves. Through the facility's sensors, she could see the incoming Earth Alliance and Meridian forces holding position just outside the storm's influence. The consciousness was no longer blocking their instruments, instead, it was broadcasting directly to them, sharing carefully filtered data about its own nature and intentions. Nikolai's voice echoed through the chamber, but it wasn't quite his voice anymore. It carried harmonics that reminded Jarrett Th of stellar winds and atmospheric percussion. It's beautiful, the voice that was and wasn't Nikolai said. All this time, it was trying to show us how to dance with the weather instead of fighting it. The vanguard almost understood, but they ran out of time. The human colonists never even knew to try. The holographic displays erupted with new information, weather patterns, atmospheric composition formulas, geological stability matrices. But they weren't just technical data anymore. Each visualization was accompanied by emotional context, the consciousness teaching them how to feel the patterns as much as understand them. The storm network, Jarrett Th clicked in sudden understanding, it's not just a weather control system. It's a planetary nervous system. And now it has a voice, the hybridized voice confirmed. And ears to listen. And hands to help shape the changes that need to come. Through the dome, they could see the storm patterns beginning to shift. The perpetual cyclones that had ravaged the equatorial regions began to dissipate. The stratospheric lightning that had made orbital insertion so dangerous started to form new patterns, natural corridors through which ships could safely pass. Admiral Hassan, Jarrett Th activated the comm system, knowing the consciousness would allow the signal through. High Commander. Are you receiving the data transmission? We're receiving. Hassan's voice was tight with barely controlled emotion. The atmospheric readings, they're stabilizing across the entire northern hemisphere. Whatever you've done down there. The consciousness is teaching us, Jarrett Th interrupted, her markings pulsing with excitement. Not just how to survive here, but how to truly live with a world instead of just on it. Commander Volkov, I made a choice, the voice that was becoming less Nikolai and more something else said. The only choice that could prove we were ready for this gift. The consciousness needed to know we could trust it before it could trust us. Someone had to be willing to let go of control and embrace connection. The facility hummed with renewed purpose as ancient systems came fully online for the first time in centuries. The reactor's containment wasn't just stable now, it was optimizing, integrating with the planetary systems in ways the Vanguard had only theorized about. The consciousness is offering us a partnership, Th explained to the listening ships above. Not just for this world, but as a model for others. It can teach us how to work with planetary systems instead of trying to force them to change. But we have to be willing to learn. To change ourselves as much as we change the worlds we hope to inhabit. Through the facility's external sensors, they could see the first signs of the planet's healing. Moisture was returning to the drought-stricken poles. Seed banks that had lain dormant for centuries were awakening as the soil chemistry shifted to more favorable conditions. Life that had retreated underground was emerging to test the changing air. Commander Volkov, Admiral Hassan's voice carried equal measures of pride and grief. Is there anything of you left in there? The crystalline glow throughout the facility pulsed once, and for a moment, Nikolai's original voice came through clearly. More than you might think, Admiral. I'm not gone. I'm just expanded. The consciousness, it's not overriding me. We're learning from each other. Growing into something new. Something necessary. The holographic displays showed new images now, technical specifications for modifying the existing orbital stations to work in harmony with the planetary consciousness, plans for settlements that could thrive in the restored environments, and most importantly, ways to replicate the communication matrices on other worlds. The consciousness is giving us everything, Th breathed, her markings shifting to colors of joy and hope. All its knowledge, all its understanding. Not just the technical data, but the wisdom to use it properly. Because we finally proved we were ready to receive it, the hybrid voice replied. Not through force or demands, but through trust and sacrifice. The seeds of tomorrow need fertile ground to grow. And sometimes that ground must be prepared through letting go of what we think we know. Above the facility, the storm had transformed into a spiraling dance of light and energy, a visible manifestation of the harmony between conscious mind and planetary system. Ships from both fleets began carefully descending through the newly created safe corridors, bringing scientists and diplomats eager to learn from this unprecedented partnership. There will be challenges ahead, the voice that was both Nikolai and the consciousness said. Political struggles. Fear of change. Those who see only the potential for weapon systems or profit. But we have given them something more valuable, proof that there is another way. A better way. Th watched as the first shuttles landed outside the facility, her markings pulsing with the same rhythm as the crystalline matrices. And we'll face those challenges together. Human, Meridian, and the consciousness itself. All of us learning to dance with the lightning instead of hiding from the storm. Through the dome, the light of Kepler 624b's red sun seemed brighter somehow, its rays falling on a world that was already beginning to remember what it meant to be alive. The seeds of tomorrow had been planted. Now it was time to help them grow.